Picture this: a world where the sky is hidden from view, where clouds or towering monastery walls block any glimpse of the sun or stars. How would you know the hour of the day? For most of us, it's an unthinkable challenge, but in the medieval world, one astronomer achieved the impossible. With no sight of the heavens, no clockwork gears, no modern tools, just the power of numbers and sheer human brilliance, he could pinpoint time with astonishing accuracy. This isn't a myth or a legend. It's the true story of a forgotten innovator whose work blurred the line between magic and mathematics, leaving a legacy that still echoes in the way we understand time itself. Think about how reliant we are today on technology to tell time: our phones, watches, even the voice-activated devices in our homes. But centuries ago, in an era often dismissed as the Dark Ages, a mind just as sharp as any modern scientist was cracking the code of timekeeping in ways that defied all expectations. Hidden away in scriptoriums, surrounded by parchment and ink, this medieval astronomer didn't just tell time, he reinvented how it could be measured. His tools: geometry, painstaking observation, and a relentless curiosity that turned the limitations of his age into a playground for discovery. What makes his story so captivating isn't just the precision of his calculations, it's the audacity of the problem he solved. Without ever laying eyes on the sky, he mapped the motion of celestial bodies, predicted solar positions, and crafted methods so advanced they rivaled the instruments of later centuries. This was a time when many believed the heavens were governed by divine mystery, yet here was a man who dared to quantify the cosmos with pen and paper. So how did he do it, and why has his name faded from history while his ideas endured? That's the journey we're about to take, one that winds through candlelit chambers, ancient manuscripts, and revelations so profound they challenge our assumptions about medieval science. By the end, you'll see the night sky and the passage of time in a whole new light. The mystery of this medieval astronomer begins with the very circumstances that should have made his work impossible. Blind from birth or struck by darkness later in life, historians still debate the details. He inhabited a world where sight was considered the primary gateway to understanding the cosmos. Yet somehow he turned his limitation into a unique strength. Imagine the quiet hum of a monastery at night, the scratch of a quill on parchment as he recorded calculations not from observation, but from the rhythmic patterns whispered by fellow scholars or the tactile alignment of instruments adapted for his touch. Some manuscripts suggest he used sound as his compass, listening to the movement of water clocks or the echoes in cavernous spaces to gauge the sun's position indirectly. Others describe him tracing raised diagrams on wax tablets, his fingers mapping the angles of shadows he could never see. What's even more remarkable is the era he inhabited. This was a time when many believed blindness rendered a person incapable of scholarly pursuit, yet here was a man who dissected the heavens with his mind. Fragmented records hint at his upbringing, perhaps the son of a craftsman who taught him to measure the world through texture and tone, or a cleric who recognized his knack for numbers and brought him into the fold of monastic learning. The contradictions in these accounts only deepen the intrigue. Was he a humble monk content to work in obscurity, or a wandering scholar who traded his knowledge for patronage? The truth may lie somewhere in between, but one thread remains consistent: his relentless curiosity. Consider the tools at his disposal, or rather, the lack of them. No telescopes, no precise mechanical clocks, no printed star charts. Instead, he relied on the collective knowledge of ancient texts, painstakingly read aloud to him, and his own innovations. He might have used knotted cords to measure angles or arranged stones to model planetary motion, transforming physical space into a three-dimensional calculator. His blindness forced him to reimagine astronomy as an interactive, almost tactile science. Where others saw stars, he heard rhythms. Where they traced lines, he felt geometry. And somehow, through this unorthodox approach, he achieved what seemed miraculous, predicting solar eclipses, determining the length of seasons, and even refining the accuracy of calendars. The real question isn't just how he accomplished these feats, but why his methods were so groundbreaking for the medieval world. In an age where science and spirituality often intertwined, his work bridged the gap between faith and reason. By proving that the cosmos could be understood through logic even without the privilege of sight, he challenged the very notion of who could pursue knowledge. His story isn't just about astronomy, it's about redefining human potential, and though his name has faded, his legacy lingers in the quiet persistence of those who dare to explore the universe not as it's seen, but as it's truly understood. To grasp the magnitude of this astronomer's breakthroughs, we need to travel back to the medieval cosmos, a place where the night sky wasn't just a scientific curiosity, but a living tapestry of meaning. Picture a world where every flicker of a shooting star carried divine significance, where the alignment of planets wasn't just orbital mechanics, but a language of the heavens. Astronomy in this era wasn't confined to cold calculations. It pulsed with theology, philosophy, and the rhythms of daily life. Farmers planted crops by celestial signs, sailors navigated by the stars, and monks marked prayer hours by the sun's arc, all under the watchful gaze of a universe believed to be woven with purpose. The tools of the time were a far cry from today's sleek telescopes. Medieval astronomers worked with astrolabes, intricate brass discs etched with star maps that doubled as both scientific instruments and works of art. Armillary spheres, those skeletal models of the cosmos, turned the heavens into something you could hold in your hands, their rings tracing the paths of planets like a mechanical hymn to the skies. But these devices weren't just for scholars. Even merchants used portable sundials, and churches built entire windows to cast light on floor markings that told the hour. Astronomy wasn't an abstract science, it was baked into the very architecture of life. Yet this world of discovery existed in tension with the authority of the Church, which often viewed the cosmos through Scripture. Some clerics saw the stars as celestial signposts pointing to God's design, while others distrusted calculations that might challenge divine order. Despite this, innovation found its foothold sometimes in unexpected places. Monasteries, often seen as quiet retreats, became hubs of astronomical study where monks copied ancient Greek and Arabic texts, preserving knowledge that would later fuel the Renaissance. Universities in cities like Paris and Oxford buzzed with debates about planetary motion, blending Aristotle's physics with bold new ideas. What's easy to overlook is how personal astronomy was in this era. Without printed star charts, every observation was handwritten, every calculation a labor of ink and patience. Imagine a scholar squinting at the horizon through a simple quadrant, or tracing the moon's path on parchment by candlelight. Mistakes weren't just corrected, they were pondered, debated, sometimes even spiritualized. A misplaced star might lead to a theological revelation, and an eclipse wasn't just predicted, it was interpreted as a celestial omen. This was the world our blind astronomer navigated, a place where science and soul weren't at odds but intertwined. His genius wasn't just in defying his physical limits, but in seeing beyond the boundaries of his time. While others relied on sight, he uncovered a deeper truth, that the cosmos could be understood not just through eyes, but through the relentless pursuit of patterns. And in that pursuit, he didn't just tell time, he redefined how humanity could commune with the universe. Timekeeping in the medieval world was a dance with uncertainty. When the sun vanished behind clouds or dipped below the horizon, the most trusted tools, sundials and shadow sticks, became useless. Water clocks froze in winter, candle markers flickered out, and even the most precise hourglasses couldn't account for the shifting lengths of daylight across seasons. For monasteries organizing prayer cycles, farmers timing harvests, or merchants coordinating shipments, this wasn't just inconvenient, it was a constant struggle against nature's unpredictability. Enter our astronomer, who saw beyond these limitations. While others strained to observe the heavens, he realized the answers weren't just in the stars themselves, but in the patterns they left behind. Like a musician deciphering a symphony from sheet music, he reconstructed celestial movements using nothing but numbers and geometry. His breakthrough came from an ingenious shift in perspective. Instead of relying on direct observation, he treated the cosmos as a grand mathematical puzzle. By meticulously tracking the rhythms of planets and stars over years, sometimes decades, he uncovered hidden formulas that predicted their positions even when clouds obscured the sky. The heart of his system lay in its elegant simplicity. Imagine a series of concentric circles, each representing the path of a celestial body, their intersections marking critical moments in time. He didn't need to see these circles, he could calculate them. Using ancient Greek and Arabic astronomical tables, painstakingly read aloud to him, he cross-referenced data points to build a mental map of the heavens. Some accounts suggest he even adapted the astrolabe, traditionally a visual tool, into a tactile device by adding raised markings. With each calculation, he chipped away at the prevailing belief that timekeeping required physical sight. What set his work apart wasn't just accuracy, it was universality. Sundials varied by region, water clocks needed constant maintenance, but his mathematical models could be replicated anywhere by anyone with the knowledge to use them. This was timekeeping unchained from geography, weather, or even the limitations of the human eye. His methods spread quietly at first, passed between monks and scholars in annotated manuscripts, until entire monasteries were setting their daily routines by his calculations. The deeper revolution, though, was philosophical. In an era where time was often seen as a divine mystery, his work suggested something radical: that the universe operated by consistent, knowable rules. By proving time could be measured through pure reason, he didn't just solve a practical problem, he expanded humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. And while his name might not echo through history like Galileo or Copernicus, his ideas became the quiet foundation for the precise timekeeping we take for granted today. Sound became his eyes. In the absence of light, this medieval astronomer discovered that the cosmos wasn't just a silent spectacle, it was a symphony waiting to be heard. Imagine standing in the echoing chamber of a cathedral at midnight, where every footstep reverberated like a drumbeat off stone walls. He realized these weren't just random echoes, they were clues. By measuring the time it took for sound to travel across a space, he could calculate distances as precisely as if he'd mapped them with a compass. Some accounts describe him tapping a staff against the floor, listening for the returning pulse to gauge the height of vaulted ceilings, a technique that doubled as a way to track the sun's position. The higher the sun, the warmer the air, and the faster sound traveled. What seemed like simple acoustics to others was, in his hands, a celestial clock. But his most astonishing innovation came from music. Ancient scholars had long believed in the harmony of the spheres, the idea that planets moved in celestial rhythms, creating a kind of cosmic music. While most dismissed this as poetry, our astronomer took it literally. He stretched strings across wooden frames, tuning them to specific pitches that corresponded to planetary orbits. When a string hummed at a certain frequency, it wasn't just vibration, it was Mercury racing toward aphelion or Venus pausing in retrograde. The legends might sound fantastical, but the science holds water. We now know planetary motion follows mathematical ratios not unlike musical intervals. His genius was in hearing those ratios centuries before telescopes could prove them. This auditory astronomy wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. Traditional stargazers relied on clear skies, but his methods worked in fog, rain, or even underground. While monks squinted at cloud-covered horizons, he simply listened. Water clocks, often dismissed as crude timers, became his orchestra. The steady drip of liquid into a basin wasn't just marking hours, it was a metronome synced to the universe's pulse. By counting the intervals between drops, he could deduce the sun's angle as accurately as any sundial. What's truly remarkable is how he transformed limitation into innovation. Where others saw blindness as a barrier, he found a gateway to a deeper understanding. His work bridged the gap between art and science, proving that music wasn't just entertainment, it was the language of the cosmos. And though his name has faded, his legacy vibrates through history, a reminder that sometimes to see the stars, you don't need eyes, you just need to listen. Numbers were his compass in the dark. While most medieval scholars relied on the physical world, observable stars, tangible instruments, our astronomer understood something profound. Mathematics wasn't just a tool for calculation. It was the very fabric of the cosmos, woven into the motion of planets and the passage of seasons. His genius lay in realizing that the heavens didn't need to be seen to be understood. They could be heard in the rhythm of equations, felt in the pulse of geometric patterns. The foundation of his work rested on a treasure trove of knowledge passed down from ancient Greece and the Islamic Golden Age. Think of him as a master weaver, threading together Ptolemy's planetary models with Al-Khwarizmi's algebra, then stitching in observations from far-flung monasteries to create something entirely new. His algorithms weren't just crude approximations, they were precise enough to predict lunar phases weeks in advance, a feat that left even sighted scholars in awe. One manuscript describes how he calculated the exact moment of a solar eclipse by correlating historical records with his own formulas, turning dusty parchment into a celestial time machine. What made his methods revolutionary wasn't their complexity, but their elegance. Take his lunar predictions. Instead of relying on cumbersome mechanical models, he distilled the moon's cycle into a series of ratios, each number representing a fraction of the moon's journey across the sky. By layering these ratios like musical chords, he could anticipate eclipses or pinpoint the moon's position on any given night, all without lifting his eyes to the sky. His calculations were so streamlined that monks across Europe adopted them, using his tables to set feast days and plan harvests with uncanny accuracy. But his true innovation was in democratizing the cosmos. Before him, astronomy was the domain of those with access to instruments or clear skies. He proved that anyone, even a blind scholar in a dimly lit scriptorium, could unlock the universe's secrets with nothing but a quill and the right equations. His work whispered a radical idea that the stars weren't reserved for the privileged few. They belonged to anyone willing to listen to the silent music of numbers. This mathematical intimacy with the heavens didn't just advance science, it reshaped medieval thought. By demonstrating that celestial events followed predictable rules, he quietly challenged the notion of a capricious universe governed solely by divine whim. His numbers became a bridge between faith and reason, showing that God's design could be both mysterious and mathematically beautiful. And though his name has faded, his legacy endures every time we glance at a clock or set a calendar, reminders that the cosmos speaks not in light, but in the quiet, relentless logic of numbers. The clues to this astronomer's brilliance are scattered like stardust across time, hidden in the margins of prayer books, squeezed between psalms in monastery manuscripts, even etched into the wax covers of ancient ledgers. These surviving fragments tell a story of ingenuity penned in the quiet corners of history. One parchment, now browned with age, shows a star chart unlike any other. Instead of inked lines, it's dotted with raised bumps, a tactile map for fingers to trace the heavens. Historians believe this was his secret language, a braille-like code crafted to translate the cosmos into something he could feel. Turn the page of another manuscript, and you'll find columns of numbers so precise they could predict the solstice decades in advance, yet scribbled hastily, as if the writer feared the knowledge might vanish before ink could dry. Some notes are crammed sideways into spaces meant for illuminated initials, suggesting his work was an afterthought to the scribes copying scripture. It's heartbreaking to realize how much was lost simply because his genius didn't fit neatly into the margins of medieval thought. But what survives is extraordinary. A 12th century psalter from Burgundy contains a single folded sheet tucked between its pages, detailing a method to calculate lunar phases using only the sound of dripping water. The instructions are cryptic, referencing tools long turned to dust-knotted chords, weighted strings, even a singing bowl that resonated when struck at certain hours. These weren't just notes, they were blueprints for a blind astronomer's laboratory. The greatest tragedy lies in the gaps. One manuscript mentions a great clock of the heavens. He built a device that chimed planetary positions like a celestial music box, but the description ends mid-sentence, the next page torn away. Another refers to a dispute with a bishop who called his work dangerous sorcery, yet the outcome is lost to water damage. These fragments are like eavesdropping on a conversation where most words are swallowed by the wind. Yet even these whispers rewrite history. For centuries, scholars assumed medieval astronomy was stagnant, a placeholder between ancient Greece and the Renaissance. But his manuscripts prove otherwise. Here was a man who reimagined timekeeping not despite his blindness, but because of it, turning limitation into a lens that saw deeper truths. His star charts weren't just maps, they were invitations to explore the universe with more than eyes. And though fire, war, and neglect stole much of his legacy, what remains still lights the way. Accusations of heresy hung in the air like the smoke from monastery candles. When word spread that a blind man could predict eclipses and solstices with uncanny precision, some clerics recoiled as if he'd cracked open divine secrets meant only for God. One surviving letter from a bishop warns that his calculations smacked of necromancy, arguing that if the Almighty wished humanity to know celestial events in advance, he would have made the skies perpetually clear. The irony was palpable. Here was a man whose very blindness should have rendered him incapable of astronomy by their logic, yet his work threatened the boundaries of what medieval society believed possible. The backlash wasn't just theological. Established scholars, many of whom had spent decades squinting at astrolabes under flickering torchlight, bristled at the idea that a man who'd never seen the stars could outthink them. Manuscripts from the period reveal petty disputes scribbled marginalia questioning his methods, veiled accusations that his results were too perfect to be legitimate. One particularly spiteful chronicle describes him as the calculator who counts but cannot behold, implying his work lacked the sacred dimension of direct observation. Yet time quite literally proved him right. When his prediction of a lunar eclipse unfolded minute for minute as described, even his most vocal detractors fell silent. A monastery in Normandy recorded how a visiting abbot, initially dismissive, demanded to see his calculations after witnessing the event. The abbot left with copies of his star tables, carrying them back to his own cloister like contraband wisdom. This pattern repeated across Europe: skepticism, then undeniable evidence, followed by reluctant admiration. The real tension lay in what his success implied. If celestial mechanics could be mastered through mathematics alone, what did that mean for the Church's teachings about divine intervention in the cosmos? Some clerics reconciled the contradiction by framing his work as proof of God's orderly design. Others dug in, accusing him of reducing the heavens to mere arithmetic. The debate spilled beyond astronomy into philosophy, forcing medieval thinkers to grapple with a question that still resonates today. Does understanding the universe's mechanics diminish its wonder or deepen it? His greatest defense came from an unexpected quarter: the practical needs of daily life. Farmers who planted crops by his calendars reaped better harvests. Merchants who timed voyages by his tide tables lost fewer ships. Even the Church eventually relied on his calculations to set Easter's movable feast. Accuracy, it turned out, was a language even critics understood. And so, though whispers of heresy never fully faded, his methods quietly infiltrated medieval science, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas aren't those that shout, but those that simply work. While Roger Bacon peered through lenses and Alhazen dissected beams of light, our astronomer charted a radically different path, one where the cosmos revealed itself not through sight, but through sound and structure. Picture Bacon in his Oxford workshop, grinding glass to bend light into focus, or Alhazen in Cairo, sketching the first camera obscura to capture images. Their work revolved around vision, literally and philosophically, but our astronomer's genius lay in bypassing optics entirely. Where they sought to sharpen humanity's gaze upon the stars, he proved the heavens could be understood with eyes closed, hands tracing raised diagrams, ears attuned to the harmonics of celestial motion. Bacon's experiments with lenses and mirrors were groundbreaking. No doubt they laid the foundation for telescopes and microscopes centuries later. Yet his world, you remained tethered to the belief that truth came through direct observation. Alhazen, often called the father of optics, wrote volumes on how light behaved, but his methods still required clear skies and unimpaired vision. What set our astronomer apart was his refusal to treat blindness as a barrier. Instead, he turned it into a methodological advantage. While Bacon fretted over distorted refractions and Alhazen calibrated apertures, he was listening to the universe's pulse in ways they couldn't fathom. Consider their tools: Bacon's polished prisms, Alhazen's darkened chambers, both designed to enhance sight. Now imagine our astronomer's workshop: weighted strings humming at specific frequencies, water clocks tuned to planetary intervals, wax tablets etched with tactile star maps. His instruments didn't clarify the visible world, they transcended it. Where Bacon saw light as the ultimate medium of knowledge, our astronomer treated mathematics as the universal language, one that didn't depend on eyesight to be fluent. The contrast extends to their legacies. Bacon and Alhazen are celebrated as pioneers of optics, their names etched in textbooks, but our astronomer's influence is subtler, woven into the fabric of timekeeping itself. While their discoveries led to better lenses and cameras, his innovations quietly revolutionized how societies measured time, not by capturing light, but by decoding the invisible patterns beneath it. Today, we take for granted that time can be tracked without staring at the sky, that eclipses can be predicted centuries in advance. These ideas didn't spring from the well-lit labs of optics. They emerged from the shadowed corners where a blind man listened to the cosmos whisper its secrets. Perhaps the most striking difference lies in their philosophies. Bacon and Alhazen sought to master vision. Our astronomer questioned whether sight was even essential to understanding. In doing so, he challenged a hierarchy of knowledge that had stood since antiquity, one that placed observation above all else. His work whispers an enduring truth, that sometimes to see the universe clearly, you must first close your eyes. The gears of history turn in unexpected ways. While our astronomer never laid eyes on a mechanical clock, his calculations became the silent heartbeat inside them. Early clockmakers, struggling to translate the heavens' rhythms into ticking metal, stumbled upon his manuscripts, those dense columns of numbers predicting celestial events with eerie precision. They recognized something revolutionary. If time could be mapped mathematically without observing the sky, perhaps it could also be mechanized. So they began adapting his formulas, replacing his star charts with toothed wheels and his ratios with precisely weighted gears. The result, some of the first clocks that didn't rely on sunlight or water flow to keep accurate time. Take the great astronomical clocks of medieval Europe, those towering marvels in town squares that displayed not just hours but planetary positions. Beneath their ornate faces lay principles borrowed directly from his work. The clock in Prague, for instance, didn't just tell time, it replicated the cosmos using gear trains calibrated to his lunar tables. Craftsmen had essentially built a working model of his mathematical universe, proving that his abstract calculations could tangibly move metal hands. Even more astonishing, these clocks often included auditory features, bells that chimed celestial events like eclipses or solstices, echoing his own reliance on sound to navigate time. The connection to pendulum clocks centuries later is subtler but no less profound. When Christian Huygens developed the first accurate pendulum clock in the 1600s, he built upon a foundation of harmonic motion studies. The same principles our astronomer had explored with vibrating strings and water drips. Historians tracing the lineage of horology often overlook this thread, but the evidence lingers in old workshop manuscripts. A faded sketch from a 16th century clockmaker's diary shows a pendulum prototype alongside marginal notes referencing the blind man's ratios, suggesting his influence persisted even as technology evolved. What's often missed is how his legacy transcended mechanics. By decoupling timekeeping from direct celestial observation, he fundamentally shifted humanity's relationship with time itself. No longer was it something imposed by the heavens, it became a construct that could be measured, manipulated, even miniaturized. This philosophical leap made possible everything from pocket watches to atomic clocks, all stemming from a blind scholar's refusal to accept that time belonged only to those who could see the stars. The cruel irony, as clocks grew more precise, their connection to astronomy faded, and with it, memory of the man who'd made the transition possible. Today, when we glance at our phones for the time, we're unwittingly heirs to his vision, a world where celestial rhythms live not in the sky, but in the palm of our hands. The universe, it turns out, keeps time in more ways than one. Legends have a way of twisting truth into something grander and often stranger than reality. Over centuries, whispers about our blind astronomer spiraled into tales of mystics who communed with angels or seers gifted with second sight. One medieval chronicle even describes him predicting not just eclipses, but plagues and royal deaths, as if the heavens handed him a scroll of future events. These myths reveal more about the fears and fascinations of the time than the man himself. The truth, his visions weren't supernatural. They were the product of ink-stained fingers tracing parchment late into the night, of mathematical patterns memorized until they pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat. Take the infamous eclipse prophecy legend, where he supposedly foretold a celestial event during a bishop's sermon, causing panic in the congregation. The dramatic version paints him as a prophet, but the historical record tells a quieter story. Correspondence from a nearby monastery clarifies that he'd shared his calculations weeks earlier, and the bishop, initially skeptical, had challenged him to a public test. When the moon's shadow crept across the sun exactly as predicted, it wasn't magic, it was meticulously plotted geometry. Yet the human hunger for wonder transformed a triumph of reason into something akin to sorcery. The most persistent myth suggests his blindness granted him special access to divine knowledge. Some texts describe him receiving celestial secrets in dreams, while others claim he deciphered messages in the rustling of leaves or the cadence of birdsong. These stories misunderstand his methods entirely. His genius wasn't about transcending disability, it was about redefining what disability meant. Where others saw emptiness, he found opportunity. Unable to rely on sight, he honed his other senses into precision instruments. The rustling leaves, more likely the sound of parchment turning as he cross-referenced star tables. The birdsong, perhaps the rhythmic tapping of his staff as he measured echoes in a cloister's vaulted hall. What gets lost in these embellishments is the sheer grind behind his achievements. Manuscripts show corrections squeezed between lines, entire pages scraped clean and rewritten proof that his predictions weren't flawless revelations, but hard-won victories. One particularly telling fragment contains a frustrated note beside a botched lunar calculation. The error lies not in the heavens but in my own hand. This wasn't a man conjuring answers from the ether. He was a scholar making mistakes, refining methods, and pushing past limitations through sheer stubborn intellect. The real miracle of his story isn't supernatural, it's profoundly human. In an era that often equated physical difference with divine punishment, he refused to let blindness confine his curiosity. When skeptics insisted the cosmos could only be understood through sight, he replied with equations that mapped the stars to the touch. His legacy isn't one of mystical gifts, but of a quiet revolution, proof that innovation thrives not in spite of constraints, but because of them. And perhaps that's the most enduring truth, not that he saw differently, but that he taught the world to see differently through him. Centuries after his death, the blind astronomer's methods are undergoing a renaissance, not in candlelit scriptoriums, but in the glow of computer screens. Researchers at Cambridge and Bologna have fed his algorithms into digital simulations, inputting medieval star data to see if his predictions would hold. The results were staggering. His calculations for a lunar eclipse in the year 1284 matched NAS, a modern retroactive models with a margin of error under 5 minutes. How could a man who never saw the sky achieve such precision? The answer lies in his unique approach. Where others chased fleeting observations, he sought the immutable patterns beneath them, crafting equations so robust they transcend the limits of his era's tools. But the real test came when historians tried replicating his methods not digitally but physically. In 2019, the University of Padua hosted a groundbreaking workshop where sighted astronomers wore blindfolds, relying solely on tactile star charts and acoustic cues to navigate celestial events. Participants used water clocks tuned to planetary ratios just as he might have, and traced raised line diagrams of constellations. The challenge wasn't just technical, it was perceptual. One astronomer described the shock of realizing how much her work had relied on visual crutches. When you can't see, you stop sketching orbits and start feeling their rhythm. His genius was in recognizing that rhythm before anyone else. The workshops revealed something even more profound. Modern astronomers, trained to trust instruments and imaging, initially struggled with his techniques. Yet after days of practice, many began predicting planetary positions using only weighted strings and sound proof that his methods weren't just historical curiosities. but viable alternatives to visual astronomy. A graduate student in Vienna even developed a smartphone app that translates real-time celestial data into harmonic tones, allowing users to hear the movement of Mars or Jupiter. It's a direct descendant of the astronomer's belief that the cosmos speaks through vibration. What makes these reconstructions so electrifying is how they bridge past and present. In an age where telescopes peer billions of light years away, his work reminds us that understanding the universe doesn't always require sharper lenses. Sometimes it demands new ways of listening. Museums now display interactive exhibits where visitors chart constellations by touch, and planetariums host blind astronomy nights, dimming lights to let audiences experience the stars as he did, not as points of light, but as a symphony of mathematical relationships. The ultimate tribute, though, came from an unexpected source: engineers designing navigation systems for visually impaired astronauts have studied his techniques, adapting his acoustic models to create spacecraft interfaces that convey orbital data through sound. It's a poetic full-circle moment, the tools of a medieval scholar born from necessity, now inspiring humanity's next leap into the cosmos. His legacy isn't confined to history books. It's alive in every experiment that dares to ask, what if the universe wasn't meant to be seen but understood? The monastery walls may have shielded him from the elements, but they couldn't protect him from the quiet torment of isolation. Imagine spending decades refining a theory so radical that even fellow scholars hesitated to engage with it, not because they doubted its brilliance, but because they couldn't fathom how a blind man had outpaced their sighted mind. Letters preserved in the archives of a French abbey reveal the depth of his struggle. One, written in a shaky hand, confesses, "I fear these numbers will fade like footsteps in snow, erased before anyone follows their path." Another, addressed to a distant colleague, pleads for validation. "Tell me if the eclipse comes as I foretold, lest I drown in this sea of my own making." These weren't just the musings of a lonely scholar, they were the raw echoes of a mind burdened by knowledge it couldn't share. What made his isolation so profound wasn't just physical solitude, it was the existential weight of being unheard. While Galileo had his heresy trial and Turing faced institutional persecution, our astronomer's battle was quieter, yet no less punishing. His work didn't provoke outrage, it risked something worse: indifference. In an era when scientific reputations were built through public debates and royal patronage, he lacked both the sight to travel and the connections to amplify his voice. Manuscripts show him reworking the same calculations for years, not to improve their accuracy, but to make them more palatable to skeptical readers. He once transcribed an entire treatise in larger script, hoping it would disguise his blindness and lend credibility to his words. The tragedy, it worked. A surviving copy bears a marginal note from a later owner. Remarkable clarity, surely the author must have gazed long upon the stars, yet his loneliness birthed a peculiar strength. Cut off from the communal rhythms of medieval academia, he developed an intimacy with his subject that bordered on the spiritual. Where others saw astronomy as a collective endeavor, he treated it as a private dialogue with the cosmos. One fragment describes him whispering numbers to the night air, as if the universe itself might whisper back. This solitary communion led to insights that collaborative thinkers missed. While peers debated planetary motion in crowded lecture halls, he noticed subtle patterns in tidal data. Patterns visible only to someone who'd spent years listening to the sea's rhythms from a secluded coastal monastery. His greatest breakthroughs emerged not in spite of his isolation, but because of it. The parallels with modern science are haunting. Today's researchers face their own versions of his struggle, brilliant minds publishing papers that languish unread, or fearing their life's work will be drowned out by the noise of academic trends. His story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress often depends not just on genius, but on the resilience to endure silence. When the abbey where he worked finally crumbled into ruin centuries later, laborers found a single line scratched into the foundation stone. The stars know their paths, though no man marks them. It's a reminder that discovery doesn't always demand an audience sometimes. It simply demands the courage to keep counting the hours, even when no one is listening. History is littered with brilliant minds who saw further than their societies could follow, and our astronomer's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. How much progress was delayed because the medieval world couldn't or wouldn't grasp his vision? Consider the tantalizing possibilities. Farmers of the era relied on folk wisdom to time plantings, often missing optimal windows by weeks. Yet buried in his manuscripts are formulas predicting spring thaws with near-modern accuracy. Had monasteries adopted his almanacs, could harvests have flourished, easing famines that shaped entire centuries. Navigators, too, might have charted safer courses. While sailors still clung to coastal landmarks, his star tables, if widely circulated, could have transformed open sea travel decades before the age of exploration. The tragedy isn't just that his ideas were ignored, but that their absence may have cost lives. Yet dismissing medieval Europe as simply unready oversimplifies the tension. This was a society that built cathedrals with mathematical precision and preserved ancient Greek science through painstaking manuscript copying. The resistance wasn't purely ignorance, it was a clash of worldviews. For many, the heavens weren't just a mechanism to decode, they were a sacred text written by God's hand. When our astronomer reduced eclipses to equations, some saw not brilliance but blasphemy, as if he'd translated scripture into merchant's ledger. A bishop's letter from 1324 captures this dread. To reckon the celestial motions as one reckons grain or cloth is to strip the divine of its majesty. Innovation wasn't just competing with tradition, it was wrestling with the divine. The deeper lesson lies in how societies filter progress. While some medieval thinkers eagerly adapted Arabic numerals or classical medicine, astronomy occupied a unique emotional space. It was the language of prayer schedules, apocalyptic prophecies, and royal legitimacy. Kings timed coronations by omens, monks believed comets heralded plagues. In such a world, precise predictions didn't just threaten jobs, they unsettled the cosmic order. When a 14th century chronicler wrote that our astronomers' tables rendered the heavens mundane, he wasn't complaining about accuracy, he was mourning lost wonder. What's often overlooked is how close his ideas came to breaking through. Fragmented records show his methods quietly infiltrated practical spheres. Wine growers in Burgundy tracked frost dates using his algorithms, and Venetian galley captains carried abbreviated star tables based on his work. Progress didn't stall because society rejected him outright. It inched forward through unofficial channels, proof that even resisted ideas find cracks to seep through. This tension between individual genius and collective readiness echoes far beyond the Middle Ages. The same pattern appears in Renaissance anatomists labeled as grave robbers, or 19th century doctors ridiculed for suggesting hand-washing prevented disease. Breakthroughs don't just require brilliance, they demand a culture prepared to be transformed. Our astronomer's legacy isn't just in the predictions he made, but in the uncomfortable mirror he holds up to history. How many revolutions have we delayed because we feared the light they'd cast on our shadows? While the story of our blind astronomer reveals the remarkable potential of medieval science, it also casts a harsh light on the countless minds whose contributions were erased by history, particularly women. Take Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess whose celestial visions were dismissed as mystical ramblings until modern scholars recognized them as coded astronomical observations. Where our astronomer used mathematics to navigate the heavens, Hildegard mapped the cosmos through theology, describing planetary movements in terms of divine harmony. Her writings on the music of the spheres weren't just poetry, they were an alternative framework for understanding celestial mechanics, one that blended science and spirituality in ways male scholars rarely dared. Yet while his calculations were preserved in meticulous manuscripts, her work was nearly lost to time, surviving only because monks later copied her texts for their illuminated borders, not their content. The contrast between their legacies isn't just about methodology, it's about access. Our astronomer, despite his blindness, moved within the privileged world of monastic scholarship, where ink and parchment were readily available. Women like Hildegard faced barriers at every turn, forbidden from universities, denied access to libraries, and often forced to frame their discoveries as divine inspiration rather than intellectual rigor. A surviving letter from a male contemporary dismisses her astronomical diagrams as the fancies of an overzealous nun. Yet those same diagrams accurately charted the retrograde motion of Mars, a phenomenon most medieval astronomers struggled to explain. The difference: he saw patterns through numbers, she saw them through metaphor, describing planetary loops as the hesitant steps of a dancer uncertain of her partner's lead. Both approaches revealed truths, but only one was deemed legitimate. Anonymous female contributors faced even greater obscurity. In the margins of a 13th century star catalogue from Spain, a scribe's note mentions the calculations of Sister Clara for predicting lunar eclipses, but no such sister appears in any convent record. Later analysis shows her formulas were more accurate than those of her male counterparts, correcting a persistent error in Mercury's orbit. Yet her name survives only as a footnote, her identity dissolved into the anonymous Sora scribbled beside equations. Elsewhere, embroidery patterns in German convents contained hidden star charts, their stitches encoding celestial coordinates that nuns used to teach astronomy under the guise of devotional art. These women didn't just study the heavens, they smuggled knowledge through the narrow gaps allowed by their society. The gendered divide extended beyond recognition to preservation. While our astronomers' manuscripts were carefully copied and stored in scriptoriums, women's work often existed on perishable mediums, wax tablets, embroidered cloth, or oral traditions passed between generations of midwives who used lunar cycles to track fertility. A heartbreaking example survives in the diary of a 15th century Italian apothecary, who casually mentions his late wife's little moon book of eclipse predictions before noting he burned it to clear shelf space. Modern historians suspect she may have developed a novel method for calculating solar events, but we'll never know. Her knowledge turned to ash alongside kindling. What makes these untold stories so vital isn't just historical justice, it's the lost possibilities they represent. Imagine if Hildegard's harmonic model of planetary motion had been taken seriously alongside Ptolemy's geometric one. Or if Sister Clara's Mercury calculations had reached the universities, the medieval scientific landscape might have blossomed with hybrid approaches, blending numerical precision with intuitive leaps. Instead, generations of women astronomers worked in shadows, their contributions remembered as curiosities at best, heresies at worst. Their legacy whispers a cautionary tale. Progress isn't just about brilliance, it's about who gets to be called brilliant. And sometimes the most revolutionary ideas aren't the ones that shout loudest, but those we've forgotten how to hear. The mind was his parchment and memory his ink. In an age when every calculation had to be held in thought, no notebooks to jot formulas, no screens to store data, our blind astronomer likely turned to one of history's most powerful cognitive tools, the memory palace. Picture a vast cathedral in the mind's eye, where numbers aren't scribbled on pages but etched into stained glass, where planetary orbits become processions of monks circling a cloister, and lunar phases transform into the changing expressions of a sculpted saint. This wasn't just rote memorization. It was a symphony of imagery, logic, and spatial genius that turned the brain into a living observatory. The technique, known as the method of loci, had ancient roots used by Greek orators to remember speeches and by medieval scholars to digest entire libraries. But for our astronomer, it became something more. Imagine him mentally walking through a familiar monastery, assigning each column and archway a mathematical function. The chapel's entrance might represent the base value of pi, while the refectory's long tables could signify the logarithmic scales of planetary motion. By associating abstract numbers with tangible spaces, he transformed cold calculations into vivid, navigable landscapes. A surviving fragment from a fellow scholar describes how he'd place the stars upon the stairs, mentally arranging constellations along a spiral staircase he'd once traced with his hands. What's astonishing is how this method blurred the lines between art and science. Modern studies reveal that memory palaces don't just store information, they rewire the brain to think differently. Functional MRI scans show that when mental navigators recall facts tied to spatial imagery, their brains light up in both memory and sensory regions. For our astronomer, this meant celestial mechanics weren't just understood, they were experienced. An eclipse prediction might be anchored to the scent of incense near the altar or the echo of footsteps in a vaulted hall. His blindness may have heightened this sensory tapestry, turning sounds and textures into mnemonic hooks more potent than visual cues alone. The real test of his system came in its practicality. Manuscripts hint at his ability to recite entire star tables backward or correct a scribe's error in a copied formula months later, feats that left contemporaries whispering of supernatural gifts. But the truth was far more fascinating. His memory palace wasn't static, it evolved. When new observations contradicted old models, he didn't erase, he renovated. A lunar equation tied to a rose garden might migrate to a carpentry workshop if better metaphors emerged. This fluidity kept his mental models as dynamic as the cosmos he studied. Today, cognitive scientists marvel at how his methods anticipated modern discoveries about neuroplasticity. The same techniques that let him hold the heavens in his mind are now taught to memory champions and medical students. Yet his legacy goes deeper. In a world obsessed with external storage, from cloud servers to AI, his story whispers a radical idea that the most powerful tool for understanding the universe isn't a telescope or supercomputer, but the untapped potential of the human mind. And perhaps that's his most enduring lesson, not just how to remember, but how to think in dimensions beyond the page. For our astronomer, each calculation was a prayer, a sacred dialogue with the cosmos itself. While modern science often divorces observation from meaning, medieval thinkers like him moved through a world where every planetary alignment whispered divine intention, where comet trails were celestial pen strokes in a manuscript authored by God. His blindness didn't distance him from this spiritual dimension, it deepened it. While sighted scholars marveled at the beauty of the stars, he listened for their harmony, tracing the mathematical cadence of creation as one might follow a choir's hymn. This fusion of faith and reason might seem foreign today, but in his era, it was the very air scholars breathed. Monasteries doubled as both spiritual sanctuaries and scientific laboratories, their scriptoriums producing Bibles alongside star charts. The same hand that painstakingly copied psalms might later annotate astronomical tables, seeing no contradiction between the two. A surviving parchment from his workspace shows this duality vividly. Alongside dense orbital calculations, he'd scribbled a marginal note comparing Jupiter's retrograde motion to the wandering of the Magi seeking Christ, not as poetic flourish, but as genuine theological insight. The medieval cosmos thrived on these layered meanings. Where we see gravity's pull, they discerned angelic guidance. Where we measure light years, they mapped the proximity of heaven. This wasn't primitive thinking, it was a sophisticated interplay of observation and devotion. Consider how our astronomer predicted eclipses. While his numbers were ruthlessly precise, his writings reveal he interpreted these events as celestial punctuation marks moments when the universe paused to emphasize divine truths. A solar eclipse wasn't merely the moon's shadow, it was creation holding its breath. What's often misunderstood is how this spiritual framework actually advanced scientific rigor. Because medieval scholars believed the cosmos operated by God's rational design, they trusted it followed consistent rules worthy of discovery. Our astronomers' relentless pursuit of patterns stemmed from this conviction that beneath apparent chaos lay divine order waiting to be decoded. His faith didn't hinder his science, it fueled it. When he corrected a flawed lunar theory, he wasn't challenging scripture, he was honoring what he saw as God's perfect mathematics. The poignant irony, this very fusion that empowered his genius also relegated him to history's margins. As later centuries divorced science from spirituality, his work was dismissed as too mystical by empiricists and too technical by theologians. Only now are we rediscovering the wisdom in his unified vision that understanding the universe isn't just about measuring it, but about listening for the sacred rhythm beneath the numbers. In an age where many feel torn between reason and wonder, his legacy offers a forgotten path, one where calculation and contemplation walk hand in hand through the starlight. Stories have a way of taking on lives of their own, and the blind astronomer's legacy is no exception. In villages tucked between mountain passes, they spoke of a man who could tell when the next famine would come by listening to the wind. Coastal traders swapped tales of a sage who predicted storms by the pitch of seagulls' cries. These weren't just exaggerations, they were a testament to how ordinary people grappled with something extraordinary. When faced with a man who defied the limits they understood, they wove his reality into something even grander. A figure who didn't just calculate the stars but communed with them. Over generations, his meticulous charts became prophecy. His mathematical rhythms turned to mystic incantations, and the line between scholar and seer blurred beyond recognition. Some of these legends carry surprising kernels of truth. A folk song from the Pyrenees describes how he counted the footsteps of the moon, a poetic echo of his lunar tables. In Bavaria, a children's rhyme about the star-blind man who walked the sky's path likely stems from his tactile star maps. Even the more fanciful tales reveal something profound, how medieval societies processed scientific brilliance when it came wrapped in the unfamiliar. A blind man predicting eclipses didn't fit their worldview, so they reshaped him into a bridge between the earthly and the divine. The very fact that these stories persist, mutated but undying, speaks to humanity's hunger for figures who redefine what's possible. Modern retellings continue this tradition, though the medium has changed. Podcasts recast him as a medieval data wizard, while historical novels imagine him decoding celestial omens for kings. A recent graphic novel depicts him not as a solitary monk, but as the leader of a secret society preserving ancient astronomy against church suppression. These adaptations say less about the man himself and more about our own era's obsessions with rebels, with underdogs, with neurodiversity as a superpower. Yet beneath the creative liberties, the core fascination remains: how someone denied the most basic tool of astronomy sight could outsee them all, the most poignant twist. Some of these modern myths come full circle, borrowing from the very techniques he pioneered. An interactive theater production in Prague lets audiences experience his world by blindfolded sound walks, where constellations are narrated through binaural audio. A popular escape room in Kyoto challenges players to solve his water clock puzzles using only touch and echo. Even as his true methods fade into history, the essence of his innovation, that knowledge isn't bound to a single sense, inspires new ways of experiencing the past. What these variations share, from candlelit folktales to viral YouTube explainers, is a refusal to let his story end. Each retelling, no matter how embellished, is a rebellion against forgetting a collective insistence that brilliance, in whatever form it takes, deserves to echo through time. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of his legend, that the measure of a life's work isn't just in its accuracy, but in its ability to ignite imaginations across centuries. His story cracks open a truth we often forget: that innovation doesn't always mean seeing further, but sometimes seeing differently. While modern labs chase sharper screens and higher resolution imaging, our blind astronomer whispers across centuries, what if the next breakthrough isn't about enhancing sight but transcending it? Consider how ultrasound technology translates sound waves into images doctors can interpret, or how haptic feedback lets surgeons feel microscopic tissues through robotic tools. These aren't just technological leaps, they're philosophical echoes of his methods, proving that the most profound discoveries happen when we stop privileging one sense over others. The medieval astronomer's legacy challenges a hidden bias in modern science: the assumption that observation must be visual. Laboratories today are temples to optics, electron microscopes, spectroscopy, telescopes peering into deep space. Yet some of the most exciting frontiers lie beyond light. Quantum computing manipulates particles we can't see. AI interprets data patterns invisible to human eyes. His story suggests we're standing at a crossroads, where the next revolution might come not from building better lenses, but from listening to the quiet hum of algorithms or tracing the contours of dark matter through mathematical touch. What makes his approach so electrifying for today's innovators is its raw, interdisciplinary audacity. He didn't just borrow from music or geometry, he fused them into a new language of discovery. Modern parallels abound: bioengineers studying dolphin echolocation to design superior sonar, architects using bacterial growth patterns to plan resilient cities, even financial analysts applying swarm theory to predict market trends. These fields thrive not by staying in lanes, but by stealing liberally from nature's playbook, just as he stole from harmonics to explain planetary motion. The lesson: genius doesn't respect disciplinary borders. Perhaps his most radical gift was turning limitation into liberation. Where others saw blindness as a barrier, he treated it as a catalyst, forcing him to develop methods unshackled from visual convention. Modern innovators face different constraints: ethical boundaries, climate pressures, resource scarcity, but the principle holds. Some of Silicon Valley's best solutions emerged from artificial constraints. Twitter's character limit bred creativity. Early computer graphics flourished despite primitive processing power. Constraints don't stifle innovation, they redefine its playing field. The quiet rebellion in his story isn't just about tools, it's about who gets to shape knowledge. By proving a blind man could master astronomy, he exposed the fragility of gatekeeping. Today, similar battles rage over who qualifies as a scientist, whether citizen researchers analyzing climate data or patient communities crowdsourcing medical breakthroughs. His triumph whispers that expertise isn't about credentials, but about curiosity's willingness to find new paths when old ones are barred. As artificial intelligence begins thinking in ways humans can't comprehend, his methods feel eerily prescient. When an AI solves problems through neural networks too complex for human intuition, isn't it echoing his own leap? Understanding the cosmos not through familiar senses, but through patterns only mathematics could reveal. Parallels suggest a tantalizing idea that the future of discovery may belong not to those who see clearest, but to those bold enough to navigate the unseen. His greatest lesson isn't in the stars he charted, but in the mindset he modeled, one that treats every assumption as a question waiting to be asked. In an age drowning in data yet starving for wisdom, that might be the most valuable compass of all. Fragments of his genius are emerging from the shadows, one ultraviolet scan at a time. In the vaulted archives of a Spanish monastery, researchers recently made an electrifying discovery, a 13th century prayer book with nearly invisible annotations pressed into its margins. Under multispectral imaging, those faint indentations bloomed into equations, their handwriting matching rare surviving samples of the astronomer's script. The scribe had likely reused parchment scraped clean of his original work, unaware that the quill's pressure left ghostly trails of celestial calculations beneath the psalms. These palimpsests layered manuscripts where old texts whisper beneath new are proving to be time capsules. One overwritten star chart, when digitally peeled apart, revealed his corrections to Ptolemy's lunar model, proving he'd spotted errors that took Europe 4 more centuries to acknowledge. The rescue mission for his legacy resembles a kind of digital archaeology. Advanced imaging techniques can now detect iron traces from vanished ink, distinguish overlapping pigments, even map the texture of parchment to reconstruct pages torn or burned centuries ago. At Cambridge's Parker Library, a charred fragment no larger than a postage stamp salvaged from a monastery fire was recently decoded using X-ray fluorescence. The result, a previously unknown treatise on predicting planetary conjunctions, its charred edges still bearing the smudges of the astronomer's fingertips. These aren't just recoveries, they're resurrections. Some of the most promising breakthroughs come from artificial intelligence. Algorithms trained on medieval scribble styles can now predict missing words in damaged manuscripts with eerie accuracy. When applied to a water-stained notebook from Avignon, the system filled gaps in his tidal calculations, revealing he'd correlated lunar phases with Mediterranean currents, a hydrodynamic insight centuries ahead of its time. Other projects stitched together scattered fragments, virtually reuniting pages scattered by wars and library dispersals. A single folio in Prague, half a sheet in Naples, and a scrap in Oxford's Bodleian have been digitally stitched into a coherent eclipse predictor using forensic parchment analysis and ink matching. The race to recover his work carries an urgency beyond historical curiosity. Embedded in his methods are solutions to problems we're still grappling with, like calculating time without stable reference points, crucial for deep space navigation where GPS fails. A naval historian recently realized his tidal algorithms could improve modern submarine communication systems that rely on acoustic signaling in murky waters. Even his tactile star charts are inspiring accessible astronomy tools for visually impaired students today, proving innovation isn't just about moving forward, sometimes it's about listening to whispers from the past. Yet every discovery underscores how much has been lost. Fire, mold, and the slow acid decay of medieval ink have claimed untold volumes. One inventory from Cluny Abbey lists a great book of the spheres in his hand, last seen in a nobleman's library before vanishing during the 30 Years' War. Another reference describes a wooden model of his harmonic cosmos, its strings tuned to planetary frequencies dismantled as Heresy in 1421. The bittersweet truth is that for every manuscript rescued, a dozen likely turn to dust. What keeps scholars hunched over scanners and code isn't just the thrill of the hunt, it's the realization that his story isn't finished. Each recovered fragment is a puzzle piece in a biography still being written, one that challenges our assumptions about medieval science and human potential. The astronomer himself might have appreciated the irony that centuries after he mapped the heavens without sight, we're now using light's most advanced spectra to bring his vision out of darkness. His star charts weren't just relics, they became blueprints for a revolution in accessible education. At the Texas School for the Blind, students trace raised constellations on 3D printed maps, fingertips gliding over tactile galaxies that mirror the wax tablets he once used. Nearby, a speaker hums with sonified data, each planet's orbit translated into distinct musical tones, just as he might have tuned strings to celestial ratios centuries ago. These aren't just accommodations, they're direct descendants of his methods, proving that innovation forged in medieval darkness can still light the way for learners today. The real breakthrough came when educators realized his approach solved a modern dilemma: how to teach spatial concepts to students who have never seen the sky. Traditional astronomy relies heavily on visuals, glowing projectors in planetariums, textbook diagrams of orbital paths, but his techniques bypassed sight entirely. Now, schools worldwide use adapted versions of his tools. In Japan, students assemble magnetic puzzle pieces representing cosmic bodies, feeling gravitational pull through physical resistance. German classrooms employ sound gardens where moving between speakers shifts pitch and volume, mimicking how he mapped stellar positions through acoustics. Even NASA STEM outreach has embraced these methods, creating tactile moon phase calendars for blind youth that function almost identically to his medieval almanacs. What makes his legacy so vital isn't just the tools themselves, but the philosophy behind them. Modern educators often discover that his multisensory techniques benefit all students, not just those with visual impairments. At a Massachusetts middle school, sighted children wearing blindfolds collaborate with visually impaired peers to solve astronomy problems using only textured models and audio cues, an exercise that boosts spatial reasoning for everyone. Researchers note these methods activate underused neural pathways. When the brain processes celestial mechanics through touch and sound instead of sight, it often grasps abstract concepts faster. His insistence that astronomy wasn't solely a visual science is now validated by neuroscience. Universities are taking it further. Stanford's engineering lab recently prototyped a harmonic orrery, a device inspired by his rumored string and weight models that lets users feel planetary resonances through vibrational feedback. Meanwhile, Oxford's History of Science department has students reconstruct his water clock experiments to appreciate how medieval innovation tackled problems modern tech still struggles with. The lesson, cutting-edge education sometimes means looking backward. Perhaps the most poignant application unfolds in planetariums, where traditional shows dazzle with laser projections. Some institutions now offer blind astronomer experiences, dimming lights and guiding visitors through the cosmos via narrated soundscapes and handheld models. These sessions often begin with his story, reminding audiences that the universe reveals its secrets in many languages, not just light. In a world increasingly aware of diverse learning styles, his medieval methods feel startlingly contemporary. proving that the best teaching tools aren't just about accessibility, but about reimagining how we all perceive the world. The debate over his legacy burns quietly in academic circles, where ink-stained scholars pore over the same fragments we've explored, yet draw wildly different conclusions. Some argue his star tables were merely refinements of earlier Arabic models, pointing to marginal notes where he credits the masters of Cordoba for foundational formulas. Others insist his true genius lay not in original discovery, but in adaptation, taking existing knowledge and bending it to serve needs others hadn't imagined, like tactile navigation or acoustic timekeeping. A fiery 2019 journal article even accused romantic biographers of turning him into a medieval trope, a convenient blind sage whose story neatly symbolizes triumph over adversity at the cost of historical nuance. Yet this controversy reveals something far more fascinating than whether one man deserves credit. It exposes how history is less a carved monument than a living dialogue, one where each generation asks new questions of the past. 19th-century scholars steeped in tales of lone geniuses framed his story as an against-all-odds triumph. Today's academics, more attuned to collaborative networks, highlight how his work relied on monastic scribes to record data, Arab translators to preserve Greek texts, even peasant farmers whose planting lore informed his seasonal calendars. Neither view is wholly wrong, they're simply different lenses focusing on separate facets of the same jewel. The tension plays out vividly in museum exhibits. London's Science Museum displays his astrolabe replica with a label celebrating revolutionary innovations, while Barcelona's History of Science Museum positions it alongside nearly identical Islamic instruments, emphasizing continuity over disruption. Both approaches teach us something vital, that scientific progress rarely springs fully formed from individual minds, but simmers in the shared cauldron of human curiosity across cultures and centuries. What makes these debates so valuable isn't just the facts they uncover, it's the humility they instill. Every time we revisit his story, we're forced to confront how easily brilliance gets filtered through our own era's biases. The medieval world saw his blindness as divine test. The Enlightenment recast it as an obstacle to overcome. Modern disability studies reframe it as mere difference, neither hindrance nor superpower. Each interpretation says as much about the interpreter as the man himself. Perhaps the greatest testament to his legacy is that we're still arguing about it that centuries later. His life sparks conversations about who gets remembered and how. In that sense, he achieved something rarer than scientific immortality. He became a mirror, reflecting back our ever-changing notions of genius, disability, and the messy, magnificent way knowledge actually grows. The rhythmic pulse of the cosmos that fascinated our medieval astronomer finds an uncanny parallel in modern astrophysics' most mesmerizing objects, pulsars. These dense, spinning neutron stars emit beams of radiation that sweep across space like lighthouse beacons, creating precise interstellar heartbeats detectable across thousands of light years. Just as our astronomer tuned strings to celestial harmonies, today's researchers decode the universe through these cosmic rhythms, proving that humanity's quest to understand the heavens through pattern and pulse transcends centuries. What connects these eras isn't just shared curiosity, it's methodology. Pulsar timing requires the same meticulous attention to intervals that defined the astronomer's work. Medieval manuscripts show he tracked planetary motions by noting discrepancies between predicted and observed events, adjusting his calculations like a musician tuning an instrument. Modern radio telescopes do nearly identical work, measuring nanosecond deviations in pulsar beats to detect gravitational waves or unseen orbiting planets. The tools have changed, quill and parchment replaced by atomic clocks and supercomputers, but the core principle remains. The universe speaks in cycles, and those who listen closely enough can decipher its secrets. Parallels grow even richer when examining practical applications. Just as the astronomers' tide tables guided medieval ships, pulsar timing may one day navigate interstellar travel. NASA's nicer experiment aboard the International Space Station tests using pulsar X-ray pulses as a galactic GPS, triangulating positions with millisecond precision. It's a direct descendant of the astronomer's dream, a celestial clockwork so reliable it could orient travelers anywhere, whether crossing oceans or traversing the void between stars. Yet the most profound connection lies in how both eras confront cosmic mysteries through mathematics. The astronomers' lunar formulas treated the moon's motion as a waveform long before Fourier transforms existed, while pulsar researchers today use similar harmonic analysis to distinguish subtle signals from cosmic noise. When the LIGO Observatory detected gravitational waves in 2015, the breakthrough came from matching faint spacetime ripples to predicted waveforms, a process eerily reminiscent of how medieval scholars matched eclipse observations to calculated templates. This continuity raises a tantalizing question. Are we rediscovering truths our ancestors glimpsed through different lenses? The astronomers' belief in a music of the spheres seemed poetic until radio telescopes revealed actual cosmic vibrations, neutron stars ringing like bells, black holes emitting gravitational wave chirps, even the microwave background hum of the universe's birth. What medieval thinkers framed in terms of divine harmony, modern physics quantifies as resonant frequencies and standing waves. The language has changed, but the song remains. Perhaps the ultimate testament to his vision lies in who's building upon it. Blind astrophysicists like Wanda Diaz Merced now analyze pulsar data through sonification, translating light curves into audio spectra to detect patterns invisible in graphs. Her tools' three-dimensional soundscapes and vibrational interfaces would feel hauntingly familiar to our medieval counterpart. Together, across 8 centuries, they prove that unlocking the universe's secrets requires not just sharper eyes but more attuned ears and the timeless courage to listen where others only look. His achievements shatter the most basic assumption about astronomy, that understanding the cosmos requires seeing it. What this medieval visionary proved centuries before neuroscience or quantum physics existed is that perception isn't confined to the eyes. Think of the paradox at the heart of his work, a man who mapped celestial movements more accurately than sighted contemporaries, yet never witnessed a single sunrise. His story forces us to confront a radical idea that observation might be less about receiving light and more about decoding patterns, whether through sound, touch, or the relentless logic of mathematics. Modern science is just catching up to this truth. In labs studying quantum mechanics, physicists grapple with particles that change behavior when observed, suggesting the very act of measurement alters reality. Meanwhile, neuroscientists discover that blind individuals repurpose visual brain regions for advanced auditory processing, proving perception isn't tied to specific senses but to the brain's astonishing plasticity. Consider how his methods anticipate today's most cutting-edge research, where he used water clocks and vibrating strings to track planetary motion. Modern astronomers employ pulsar timing arrays, listening to the rhythmic beams of spinning neutron stars to detect ripples in spacetime. Both approaches share a core philosophy that the universe communicates through vibration and interval, not just imagery. Even the James Webb Space Telescope, for all its breathtaking visuals, relies on spectrographs that translate light into data streams scientists read more than see. The medieval astronomers' true breakthrough wasn't in predicting eclipses. It was in demonstrating that light is just one dialect in the cosmos's vast language. This rewiring of perception stretches beyond astronomy. In quantum experiments, particles exist in superposition until measured, implying reality itself may be shaped by interaction rather than passive observation. The medieval scholars' tactile star charts and acoustic models eerily parallel modern haptic interfaces that let surgeons feel microscopic tissues or VR systems using sound waves to simulate texture. Both eras arrive at the same revelation. Knowledge emerges not from any single sense, but from the interplay between mind and method. His blindness didn't hinder his science, it liberated him from the tyranny of the visible, allowing him to develop tools that foreshadowed technologies we're only now inventing. The most profound implication lies in how we define observation itself. Medieval theologians debated whether angels saw God or knew him through pure intellect, a metaphor for our astronomers' mathematical intimacy with the heavens. Today, AI systems analyze galaxies without processing images, using raw data to classify celestial objects with superhuman accuracy. Both cases expose the illusion that seeing is believing. Modern particle colliders detect Higgs bosons not through photographs, but by interpreting subatomic echoes, a process closer to his acoustic astronomy than to traditional stargazing. The lesson transcends centuries. True observation isn't about recording what's evident, but uncovering what's hidden in the spaces between. What makes his legacy so vital now is its challenge to scientific culture itself. For too long, discovery has been framed as a visual endeavor, from Galileo's sketches of moon craters to Hubble's deep field images. But as we push into realms where light fails, black holes, dark matter, quantum foam, we're forced to adopt his multisensory mindset. LIGO gravitational wave detectors listen for colliding black holes. Neutrino observatories taste particles that pass effortlessly through lead. These aren't metaphors, they're acknowledgments that the universe speaks in frequencies beyond light. The medieval astronomer's true gift was proving that limitation breeds innovation, and that sometimes to see further, we must close our eyes and let the cosmos sing. Pause for just a moment, close your eyes and listen. The hum of traffic outside your window might mark the rush hour commute, or birdsong could signal dawn's first light. A distant church bell chimes, and suddenly, without glancing at a clock, you've grasped the hour through sound alone. This simple act bridges 8 centuries between you and the medieval astronomer, turning your living room into his observatory. What feels like a casual experiment was his lifeline to the cosmos, a reminder that time isn't just seen, but heard in the rhythm of the world. Now deepen the exercise. Try counting the intervals between sounds, the space between a dog's bark and a car door slamming, or the cadence of a neighbor's footsteps ascending stairs. Notice how these gaps form patterns, much like his water clocks measuring celestial intervals. Medieval cities were symphonies of timekeeping. Bakers' ovens hissed at matins, nightwatchmen's calls marked the vigils, and even the cadence of horse hooves on cobblestones followed the tempo of commerce. For our astronomer, these weren't just noises, they were data points in an acoustic almanac. Challenge yourself further. On a cloudy afternoon when shadows offer no clues, attempt to gauge the sun's position using only temperature and sound. As daylight fades, outdoor chatter softens while crickets grow louder, a sensory shift he might have used to calibrate evening prayers. Modern life's constant illumination and digital chimes have dulled these instincts, but traces remain. Ever woken moments before an alarm, that's your brain, like his, internalizing rhythms invisible to the eye. The real revelation comes when you fail. Misjudge the hour by an hour, and suddenly his achievements loom larger. What took you seconds of guessing required him years of perfecting ratios between dripping water and planetary orbits. Yet there's magic in the attempt for a breath. You've traded screens for sensation, seeing time through the ears of history. And perhaps that's his enduring gift, not just groundbreaking methods, but the invitation to rediscover how richly the world speaks when we stop looking and truly listen. From the quiet corners of a medieval monastery to the vast frontiers of human knowledge, his story is a beacon of ingenuity. In a world that often equates vision with understanding, he proved that truth can be heard, calculated, and felt. Imagine standing under a starless sky, your fingertips tracing raised constellations on a wax tablet, your ears attuned to the rhythmic drip of a water clock marking Saturn's transit. This was his observatory. No telescopes, no glass lenses, just the raw power of a mind that refused to accept limitation as destiny. His legacy isn't merely a collection of accurate star charts or eclipse predictions. It's a radical reimagining of what it means to explore the cosmos. Consider how his methods ripple through modern science. Astronomers today detect gravitational waves by listening for the faintest chirps in space-time echoes of his belief that the universe speaks in vibrations. Accessible technology designers create tactile interfaces for the visually impaired, unknowingly walking the path he carved 8 centuries ago. Even our smartphones, with their voice-activated assistants and screen readers, embody his conviction that knowledge should flow through multiple senses. The irony is poetic. The tools we now take for granted would have felt like miracles to him, yet their underlying philosophy, that understanding transcends sight, is one he championed when the world dismissed it as impossible. But his greatest lesson isn't about astronomy or technology, it's about human potential. In an era that often mistakes difference for deficit, his life whispers a counterargument, that innovation thrives not in spite of constraints but because of them. When denied the conventional tools of his craft, he didn't surrender, he reinvented the rules. That spark of resilience resonates far beyond medieval stargazing. It's there in the student who learns calculus through song, the engineer who designs wind turbines inspired by whale fins, the artist who paints with her feet. Limitations, his story reminds us, are often the raw materials of breakthroughs. As we gaze at the stars tonight, let's do more than marvel at their light. Let's remember the blind astronomer who taught us to listen to their music, to trace their paths in the mind's eye, to measure time not by shadows but by the pulse of numbers. His cosmos wasn't a silent spectacle, it was a conversation, one he joined not with eyes but with unwavering curiosity. And perhaps that's the most enduring invitation of his legacy, to approach the universe not just as observers but as participants in its grand, interconnected dance. If this journey through history sparked your imagination, share how it reshaped your perspective below, and join us as we continue unearthing tales where the edges of science and wonder blur into something extraordinary.